Good morning, everyone. This is Ron. It is Sunday morning, a little after 11 a.m., and we'll go ahead and get started with our session. Before Nick does a recap of what he talked about yesterday and see if you have any questions for him, is there anyone else that has any questions on any other topic or anything else other than what Nick talked about? And we'll get to, I'm anxious to hear where Nick is taking us today. So I just want to make sure we get everybody else's questions in. Any other questions or comments? Okay. Nick, if you don't mind, I'll ask you to sum up what you have talked about so far, and then we'll see if we have any questions or comments directed at you. Okay, all yours.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Yesterday we talked about a lot of things related to the Age of Aquarius, the movie Avatar: Way of Water, as a sort of psychic herald of the Age of Aquarius, what the water is in terms of the energy that is available to us and how we have to learn how to adapt to our energetic and spiritual environment as it changes, and many things related to ancient cultures and how they were aware of the positions of stars and the transition of the ages. Talked about Atlantis as being something that is not purely a allegory, but was a real place, and the way they developed and what brought about their downfall, at least in part, and how that we currently are at a similar point in our sort of development of our society and civilization, but that I do not believe that we are destined for downfall, although our sort of path to saving ourselves is still not set in terms of what it will actually be like. We are in the beginning process of it, and that it is ultimately going to be a good thing, but it is still going to be a challenging thing. We talked about a lot of the symbolism in the movie Avatar: Way of Water, and had many questions and sort of branching topics surrounding these main themes. So that's what we talked about yesterday in overview. Did anybody
Hey,
have...
Nick.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. Tie in Age of Aquarius. Take us back and give us an understanding of that and how that affects us where we are now. You touched on it some yesterday, but if you don't mind.
Sure. So the various ages that we sort of pass through together are just cycles of time. So the Age of Aquarius has come before, of course, so now we're moving back into that age. And every cycle of time, or rather the constellations, the planets, etc., are markers of cycles of time. And what is different about the cycles of time is the energetic and spiritual environment. It is the nature of the way we are affected individually and collectively because of our spiritual environment, the sort of spiritual atmosphere that we have contributed to individually and collectively, and also the so to speak, spiritual atmosphere that is naturally present and changes according to those cycles of time. So the Age of Aquarius is a different spiritual environment with different spiritual opportunities and influences. And it is incumbent on us to recognize the nature of our environment and to move in tune with it and adapt to it. And part of what we're seeing in just the various shift of culture and society is our sort of collective attempt to adapt to the new wave of consciousness that is arising within humanity collectively in response to the shift in the ages and the transition to the age of Aquarius. So it's very much a period of remembering things that we have forgotten. It's very much a period of gaining insight and spiritual abilities that we have forgotten. And one of the reasons we talked about Avatar: The Way of Water is because that movie was very symbolic of this transition to this age of water. And water spiritually has many meanings, but in reference to the sort of pouring out of the water that occurs during the age of Aquarius, it is the nature of the spiritual energy that binds us all together and connects us, that we have a greater ability to sense and move through. And it takes some time to adapt to that, since we are coming out of a more egotistically based and materially based way of running our society, of behaving and relating to one another.
Question.
Yes, ma'am.
So the pouring out of water is symbolic of the pouring out of the spirit, or more enlightenment?
Pouring out of spirit, I think, is a good way to think of it. Yeah. It's you're in some ways being slowly led into the water and learning how to swim as you go in terms of what is collectively happening. So I mentioned that verse in the New Testament where Jesus tells his disciples to look for the man with the water pot, and how the symbol of the age of Aquarius is a man pouring out water. I think that's the constellation or celestial equivalent. And traditionally, carrying water was associated with women, but it's significant because it's the man doing that in the story in the New Testament, and also in the constellation or the celestial equivalent. And that's indicative of what is happening within us individually and collectively. It is the male sort of aspect of humanity seeking its own feminine side, quote unquote. And it is, what that means is has the need to connect to the spiritually feminine principle within itself in order to know itself better, in order to correct its behavior and move away from sort of the egoism and self-destruction that comes without being connected to the sort of feminine or maternal aspect of the spiritual self. It is something that has to be reincorporated into our approach to relating to each other and to the world itself, in terms of what men sort of collectively need to do in order to improve their behavior. And we talked about how some of what we see as the gender fluidity is the reason we call it fluidity. It's because of an attempt to sort of interface with this new sense of self that is emerging with this spiritual environment as it shifts. So some of that is the result of confusion. Some of it is something a bit more ancient and fundamental, but the point is what we see will work itself out as we move further into the spiritually shifted environment that is represented by the age of Aquarius. So we talked about how femininity is more instinctively connected to the spiritual source of self, and the is more instinctively aware of the connected nature of all things. And in terms of who has more work to do in order to remember this and correct their behavior, it's definitely men, which is why the age of Aquarius is sort of associated with symbols of masculinity doing feminine things, like men carrying water in the New Testament, men pouring out water in the celestial equivalent of that. It is a need for an egotistical or confused masculinity to calm down, to remember the connectedness of all things and the connectedness of self to all things. And these principles, they're sort of in some ways beyond the sort of our regular concepts of male and female, of gender, but these fundamental spiritual principles have more in common with sort of material femininity. In that material femininity, like physical women are an expression of this principle and sort of more instinctively connected to it. If you had to pick between masculine and feminine, the fundamental nature of the creator and reality would have to be feminine, in terms of the spiritual principles that is. Masculinity is part of the, in terms of what the fundamental spiritual principle that masculinity is, it is a need to return. It is a work order that the sort of a cosmic maintenance work order. It is a recognition of the spiritual work that needs to be done in order to return us collectively to a state of, well, a more original spiritual state. And so males are more so charged with doing that work. And all spiritual work is observing and correcting and healing and balancing the self individually and in terms of how we collectively relate to each other.
Nick, can I pop in and ask a question?
Yes, ma'am.
What you said about males in the work order reminded me of how bees are organized. Do you think there's anything there with that?
I believe so. It's generally easy, or sort of in certain examples like bees or even ants, for to have harmony amongst your large group of people attempting to achieve a task when that group is feminine or female. And I don't want to draw too much of an equivalency between humans and sort of other, well, insects, but or other animals necessarily, because we're supposed to be smart enough to be able to get this.
Right.
However,
Okay.
I think in terms of global population, there's always a little bit more women, and the percentage is slightly more favored for women, although I guess in modern history that some of that has maybe been skewed by the egotistical behavior of masculinity. But naturally, I think there's more women in the human population, and that is the sort of leaning towards that principle being dominant, if that makes sense.
It does. Thanks.
Hey, Nick, I have a question for you.
Yes, sir.
When we talked about, I think John 3 it was, where Jesus talks to Nicodemus. I can't remember scripture where it is, but when he talks about being born again is what we've been raised on, what we call it, but we see it as returning to beginning. And S made a comment that is something you only need to do one time, and I kind of saw that. But I'm listening to what you're saying here too, and that returning to beginning sounds like what you're describing. So this is a lifetime thing. It's not I got it, a light go off and I'm there. This is a journey kind of thing, because you talk about the cycles of the planets, and the age of Aquarius has been here before, and we are really just get reacquainted to who we are. That sounds a lot like the same thing, returning to who we are and becoming aware of that presence of we are the creator and the creator is us. So I guess I'm trying to ask a question. Is that linked to the same, or just put it in your words for me so I can see this.
Oh yeah, no, I very much agree. That process that we've spoken about as the return to beginning is the same as the process of learning to balance, harmonize, and correct your own self wherever you realize that needs to happen. Think about how babies are born, or rather they're formed within water in the womb. You're baptized in water. The age of Aquarius is very much a global baptism. And baptism is all about, to put it simply, I guess, washing away those things that we recognize we do not need by being immersed in a new awareness. Turn to beginning is quote unquote the end goal, and the process of baptism, or the shift into the age of Aquarius, wherein we collectively go through that immersion in a new spiritually based awareness and a new energetic environment, are steps along the path towards beginning the original knowledge of self before illusion came in to pull us in a different direction.
Hey Nick, it's Charles.
Mm-hmm.
I'm seeing, what you're telling us is true, because all my life I've been looking at these zodiac signs and things.
Mm-hmm.
The people don't change it. And so I never understand that it was the man, because I always seen the women pouring the water out of the cup, bowl, or pot. I mean, this right here, what you're teaching us now, is to connect back to before they changed everything.
When you say changed, you remember
What I mean,
an example of that?
change. What I mean by change, it's just like our history, our ancestor history.
Okay.
The things that,
Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
like the things that they put in our mind of how the history was, but that was not what the history was about, and that wasn't what the history was. And just like they taught us voodoo was bad, but voodoo and all the other stuff is a thing that they did back in the day to either heal us or whatever. And Caucasian made us think that he was all blonde and beautiful, slick hair. And I mean, every person in the Bible was white instead of black. And now you're telling us that the zodiac signs that of Aquarius, the man pouring the water instead of the woman. So I'm thanking God for you because it making us, like I say, you're making us heart feel for this.
I see. Thank you, sir. And yeah, the need to remember those things that you were told were negative is part of that process of relearning and adapting to this spiritual environment.
You're right.
Mm-hmm. So it's saying remembering and rebuilding those things that we've forgotten as a result of this influence, as a result of the shift in the way we are thinking about ourselves and each other. And it is sort of parallel with the decline in traditional religious setting, particularly in Christianity. And that has to happen because that is a egotistical institution, as we have talked about in many different ways and many times. The one thing I mentioned at the end of yesterday was that those sort of traditional religious patriarchal settings attempt to control or limit the influence of women because there is a sort of instinctive remembrance of their part, whoever's sort of in control of that environment, if they want to maintain their control over it. There is an instinctive remembrance and just a direct recognition on their part that women are not compatible with an out of control ego in men. They will point it out. They will have a problem with it. Women will be instinctively repulsed from that. And that's not to say that men can't be, but as we're talking about these spiritual principles, as I mentioned, the principle of femininity is more sort of instinctually connected to spirit and to balance and harmony. And so that principle represented by women in the institution of religion will always have a problem with the egotistical nature of that environment. And it's a various, it's various forms of mental and physical control that stops them from acting on what it is that they know. Anyway, yes.
Nick, I wonder if the issues that we have physically with things like Alzheimer's, being not able to remember recent memories, but able to remember what happened long ago, is a physical mirror of what we're talking about, recovering the memories and the truth of those memories of who we are spiritually. I wonder if Alzheimer's is the physical aspect of that. And having put this in the macro, I'm wondering now if there's opportunity now for things like Alzheimer's to be cured. It's not a question, it's just a comment, just to see if you have any follow-up with that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I don't know specifically what Alzheimer's might be connected to, and I'm pretty sure it's more than sort of one main thing, but that is certainly a possibility. Sort of what comes to me when I think of what Alzheimer's is like well, in terms of the possible spiritual origin of that, is like a complete jumbling and confusing mental environment that reproduces itself physically. So if you think too much, your ability to think eventually breaks down. But that's just a hunch I have as to what might be one of the causes for something like that.
And I have a question kind of related to that.
Mhm.
In a loose kind of way. What about what you were saying before about men and men's egos and all that stuff? Is that where's I don't even know how to put this. But I guess in the last few years with COVID and people being together, we've had so many instances of murder suicides, or either just murders, with men killing their wives and then killing themselves, or just killing their wives and getting rid of the body. And is that related to I mean, on a spiritual level, is that related to the male ego's resistance to that feminine principle of spirit and I don't know. Do you understand what I'm trying to say?
I think so. And I would agree, yeah. And it's resistance to that out of sort of extreme selfishness and confusion. And there's also an element of ignorance. I think there's always been a sort of higher suicide rate amongst males than females, amongst men rather than women. But I think, well, it is related to sort of the nature of masculinity on a fundamental level and what it has to learn how to do in order to find purpose for itself. And I think men have a much more sharp break with everything when they sense a lack of purpose.
Nick,
Mhm.
Along with that, I don't have any data to back this up. Maybe it's just my observations of what I've heard in the news. Those murder suicides, to me, I guess one of the things that get my attention is that a lot of them are older people, you know, in their 50s or 60s. These men are doing that, and I guess that kind of surprised me because you get, you know, I have a feeling personally that by then things should be settling down in you, and you should be at peace more than you were in your 20s or 30s. But I just happen to notice that with age, and like I said, I don't have any data on that, so I could be off. Might just be the ones that I've read, and I don't know if anybody else noticed that either. But that's part of it that got my attention.
Thank you. Yeah. I think there's many reasons for the trends that we see. I think the way sort of capitalist economics plays out and the way it shapes our society has a big part to play in that. Generally, when you have less hope for any sort of progress that you're going to make socially or economically, then your desire to leave increases. But there are many reasons for that, I think. But the spiritual principle behind some of those things has to do with the way in which men and women, let's say, project themselves into the future. the way in which men and women believe they are supposed to continue to live in the world. And when that future is cut off, or when it seems hopeless, I think men have a much more, shall we say, straight to the point reaction to that kind of thing, even though it is also based in some level of ego and confusion about what to do. And I think that's part of what we're seeing more so as we shift into the age of Aquarius in particular, because it is a transition away from something that was familiar into something that is new and weird and different and strange. A new way in which we structure our human society, and a sort of new basis for our relationships. And that can be very difficult, even if you don't, consciously know what's going on as you see culture and society shift. That can be very difficult to adapt to if you have already become rigid in an older way. And I think there's, many psychological and emotional reasons that are tied to all these reasons that we see people killing themselves or harming themselves in whatever fashion. One of the reasons related to the shift into the age of Aquarius that men feel isolated. One of the things I do remember reading is that apparently the number of people who feel alone or do not have friends is increasing rapidly. And that sort of isolation is directly opposed to the fundamental nature of not only this energy that we have access to as we shift into the age of Aquarius, but also fundamentally opposed to sort of the nature of spirit. All things are connected, and it is about exploring, enhancing, and knowing that connection. And the sense of isolation, alone, or loneliness, and disconnection from everyone around you and from those things in your life that would bring you meaning is certainly another thing that is contributing to people's desire to either commit suicide, harm themselves, become trapped in an addiction, etc. And I think there's many reasons. Well, there's a few key reasons, and that sense of isolation and loneliness is increasing. I think a lot of it has to do with our reliance on technology to be sort of intermediary when we communicate. COVID has 100% increased that sense of loneliness and isolation over the past few years. And that is something we're going to have a sort of break with. I think part of what is going to happen as a result of this awareness that we need to change the way we relate to each other and how we sort of use technology. One of the things that I think is going to happen is that we are going to reject social media as we see it in terms of the material technology, and attempt to re-embrace something that is a bit more offline, and attempt to re-embrace something a bit more community-like in terms of how we relate to each other. And I think we're all instinctually aware that that has to happen, because we are essentially driving ourselves insane. It's like if you were suddenly immersed underwater, but you didn't know you could breathe or even how to breathe underwater, you would begin to panic because you think you're going to drown. And that is hopefully not a bad analogy of kind of what's happening within the spiritual environment that we are transitioning to. People feel like they're drowning because they don't know that they can breathe underwater already. Nobody told them this. They have no context for that in their environment. They don't know where to go. They don't know how. And that is in part our job in order to be a sort of spiritual and psychic anchor for the awareness and the knowledge associated with how to adapt to this new spiritual environment and this new cultural and social environment that will be built up around it.
Nick, you said they're drowning because what?
A variety of reasons, but I said it's kind of like people feel like they are drowning because they don't know how to adapt or change in accordance with how we are changing socially, culturally, and underneath all of that, spiritually. And part of what we have to do is help people not just swim, but understand that they can breathe underwater in this and a metaphor. I'm finished. Go ahead if you were going to say something.
I was just going to also liken that to navigation in the water. People have to know not only how they breathe underwater, but how to navigate in the water as well.
Mm-hmm. And I think in terms of how that plays out in our society and culture, it's what do we choose to build and what direction do we choose to head in as a result of this new awareness or this old awareness that we're remembering. So one of the things I mentioned yesterday was the increasing number of women that are in positions of political authority as a symbol of this kind of transition. Is a move back to a more matriarchal structure of society, even though it's happening slowly. And once again, not to draw too much of an equivalence between people and bees, but the structure of society under a matriarchy is more harmonious than one under a patriarchy. Because men are all about getting things done. Who I got to fight? Okay, that guy. What I got to build? Okay, I got to build that. And if those simple, sort of simple solutions to problems are not present, then we tend to go crazy. Whereas women are slightly more sophisticated in their approach to problem solving.
Hey, Nick.
I think, was that George and then Barbara?
I was going to say simply that in the material, even men are more interested in outcome, whereas women tend to zoom in on the process. How do I get this? In other words, the connectedness, the relationships. How do I get from here to here? What are the steps that we need to take to do that? Whereas men don't care about all of that minutia. They just want to see the end product.
Yeah. And I'm sorry, was that you, Ron, before Barbara?
Yeah, I was just going to say you were mentioning the bees. If we take all the animals, especially the ones we mentioned in the Bible, but we've talked about the eagles and the eagle's nest and her pricking her nest so the young don't not comfortable and they end up having to sit on the perch so they can have the courage to fly. We talk about the ants, we talk about the bees. I mean, if we pull all this together and look at a lot of the animal kingdom, it's a lesson to us and tell us how to be harmonious, how to get results as Barbara just said, looking at things not from an ego perspective, but from the perspective of the community needs this. This what needs to happen. This what needs to be done, and I am part of that sacrifice to get it done. We can see that in the animal world. You don't see it so much in from humans, though. At least not yet. I'm done.
Thank you, sir. Yeah. And that's why it's sort of being in nature, observing nature is so beneficial, because the patterns in nature are patterns of the self. And when you learn to recognize the cycles as they are present in nature, you can understand how you work. And that's another thing that we're probably going to have to, well, that will be addressed, I think, is our disconnection from natural cycles. That will drive us insane collectively as well. It has, and I think that is something we will move back towards making a bigger part of our society and culture.
Good morning, Nick. How are you?
Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. I wanted to just refer to the movie Avatar, because the way of the water, it made me just reflect a little bit that in essence, water is the life force that centers our spirit and body, signifying the wisdom and conscious awareness. And so when we, shouldn't take for granted when we talk about the birth of a child and how that being is in the water of that mother for 9 months. And that whole process where Barbara was talking about the outcome in terms of how men look at it, let's just look at the outcome. But there's just something, about the eternal waters. There's something about, us taking the time to ponder the spiritual meaning of water, to celebrate, its gifts, in terms of on earth. And so I think that, again, spiritual significance of the way of the water is so powerful. And as we begin to understand it more and more in terms of as we go back to the beginning, as Ron mentioned, there's just something about the eternal waters. And so I think that, again, for those of us that can appreciate balance in terms of the masculine and feminine energy, I think even though we have both aspects of that energy, but I think being able to process that as far as the masculine is just so powerful when we can appreciate the birth of a child, but more importantly, being in that water for that period of time. So I just want to share those thoughts. I'm done. Or your thoughts.
Thank you, sir.
Good morning, everyone. To go a little bit back, you all were talking about suicide. And one of the things that we need to know about suicide as it relates to the African American male, if the mother is living, the chance of suicide is not as great as if the mother is not living with African American males. African American male about to jump off a bridge, you go get his mother, there's a chance you can bring him down. With African American males now, when they write their letter, they're going to identify their mother first. This is what makes it intriguing with the OJ. When OJ wrote his suicide note, not one mention of his mother. However, when they took the piano out of his house that his mama played on, he broke down and started crying. So that's just an argument amongst people in the criminal justice field, are just people who know. So with suicide, with the African American male, don't know nothing about the Puerto Rican male, the Armenian male, the Mexican male, just with African American males. If the mother is still present, chance of suicide is not that great. If the mother is not present, meaning they've transitioned, it's more likely that it will take place. The other question that I have is, when we say the male is this and the female is this, are we saying that's how we are as an individual? Or where's your information coming from to say that more males are more erratic in their thought process of obtaining something? Okay, my wife is saying not erratic, but that's what I'm saying. Where y'all information coming from? Because I have information that says more males are introverts, more females are extroverts, and they have stated that introverts really have a stronger thought process than extroverts. So when you all are saying, oh, not you all, but those that have said the male is this way, the female is this way, are you saying, Nick, were you saying as a male, your thoughts are all over the place? Just asking the question. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So specifically, the thoughts being erratic is not what I mentioned, but rather the sort of fundamental spiritual principle that more significantly influences men is the masculine spiritual principle. And there are certain characteristics associated with the sort of masculine aspect of energy. And so, as evidenced by higher suicide rate in males, a variety of other things in terms of how males seek to solve problems and behave in society, is evidence of the sort of way in which males seek to, or rather, the way in which males, on average, need to be corrected. And by males, I'm referring mostly to the sort of masculine principle as it presents itself. There are many, many sort of individual, distinct circumstances that, for men and women, obviously, that could produce a particular kind of behavior. But in terms of how these archetypes play out in society and in our culture, on average, there is a tendency for masculinity to do certain things and respond certain ways to particular problems. So I didn't say the thoughts of men are erratic, as opposed to the thoughts of women are not being erratic, but rather the way in which males seek to solve problems comes from a different sort of reservoir of characteristics than the way in which women seek to solve problems. And due to that difference, the response of men to certain situations is more likely to be one of self-harm or violence, depending on that situation. But on average, masculinity itself has more work to do in order to learn how to adapt to this shift in spiritual environment.
Nick, I just want to add, with evidence, just depending on where you even work. I work in a school setting, in an elementary school, and it's right there in your face. The males, the ISS, number of males being suspended from school, the fights, is also in my face in my own household. I live with 4 males and a male dog. It's the same thing. It's the evidence right there. And the thought process, the first reaction versus a response when you compare males to females.
Thank you, ma'am. And I'm not saying...
Nick, I was getting ready to say just what you're going to say. We're not saying that one is better than the other.
Correct.
What we
Thank
are
you.
saying is that we need both. Both are equally important in order to birth continued spiritual creation.
And I guess I was going to add too. If you look at the history of indigenous people, the indigenous people recognize the strength of feminine energy versus just this masculinity dominating everything. So, yeah, I mean, both is needed for balance. So, thank you.
Thank you. Did that help answer your question, George?
Very much so, Nick, and to everyone who participated in it. I will say this. Monique and I listening to the lesson 9 in terms of how we maneuver. I think I maneuver a little bit better than my sister. And my sister runs the family. Since mom and daddy then transitioned, she's the pillar of the family. And I will say in 354 Marion Avenue, my maneuverability as far as spirituality is different from Monique's. I'm not going to say it's better. I will acknowledge that it is different, yet I will say it covers a little bit more acreage. But nonetheless, though, I think what Ron said was very needed. Masculine energy and feminine energy, they do need one another. And oftentimes in the subject matter with some people, they exalt feminine energy and they don't bring masculine energy up behind it. It's like masculine energy is not good. And just feminine energy is just where you need to be. Yet one without the other is not good. So what Ron said, I really appreciate that they're both here to balance each other out. Thank you.
Thank you.
I guess too, one of the concepts that we deal with on the phone and continuously is we have to keep in mind that we're not talking about sexes. We're not talking about personally men and women or who Ron is versus who Barbara is or Kathy or anyone else is. Ron is trying to find the balance in Ron and find out that internal part of me that is masculine and internal part of me that is feminine, and understand that and come to a better understanding of myself and using that to help me balance who I am. So from that perspective, it gives you a broader sense of what the discussion is trying to say anyway. So if we look at it from that perspective, and as George said, he talked about the differences between he and Monique. If you go back and look at Genesis at the beginning, the female is described as someone who stands against and opposes. She's also described as someone who puts a hedge around you and protects that masculinity. So both are needed. Both are needed. And the problem I think a lot of the masculine energy has is we don't recognize the strength of feminine energy. Our definition of strength is might and brute force, but feminine energy is strong to me because of the spirituality and the enlightenment that it brings that masculinity doesn't see when it's just being brute force and brute force and domination. So that's the difference to me is trying to see yourself and balance who you are, and we do that. That's what this is all about. So, thanks.
Thank you. Spiritually speaking, physically speaking, brute force or power without compassion, empathy, etc., immediately brings self-destruction or destruction of your environment. So spiritually speaking, there's a greater emphasis or greater importance placed on the need to employ the feminine principle first before anything else. So like what you were just saying, Ron, where the feminine principle protects or puts a hedge up around the masculine principle, that is the in terms of our spiritual structure, our need to not react in a stereotypically masculine way, but respond as a result of listening to the feminine principle that we are connected to, so that passing through the feminine principle, whatever it is we encounter, once it gets to the masculine principle has been able to be informed by that feminine principle and then act accordingly, if that makes sense. Like whatever you encounter is passing through that layer of protection. You are being made aware of the sort of deeper spiritual meaning of whatever it is that needs to happen as a result of the interface that whatever you encounter has with the feminine principle. So if you reach out with that spiritual principle first, before employing what is masculine about the nature of spirit, then you will have a better direction to move in, because you will have been wisely informed. And that is how that masculinity, in terms of the structure of our own spirit, is protected, because it is not allowed to go off in a negative direction for itself or other people, because of the influence of the feminine aspect of self.
Nick, this is Evelyn. So what you're talking about, the definition of what you're describing, is truly the virtuous woman that we hear in religion. You know, the virtuous woman, you're talking about the true virtuous woman. And what religion tells us about the virtuous woman, it doesn't even scrape the surface. So what you guys are talking about is the true virtuous woman that we hear. Well, yeah, that's all I want to say.
Thank you, ma'am. Absolutely.
And I know we're not talking about the physical woman, but the feminine energy. That's what I'm talking about.
Right. And what religion does is take that principle and take that sort of and make it about sort of physical, material, you woman sitting right there. You need to be virtuous. When vast majority of the time it's men causing the problems. Yeah, that's how ego works. It projects itself onto everything that is not it. This whole phenomenon of that we see, I don't know if any of you are familiar with a man by the name of Andrew Tate. If you're not good, that means you pay less attention to news like that than the rest of us do. But basically, he's like a human trafficker who got arrested recently, but he was very popular on TikTok and social media, particularly with young men. And he had a lot of misogynistic and sort of violent things to say about women and how to conduct yourself, etc. One of the reasons that that kind of rhetoric is so popular is because of that, shall we say, lack of training, the lack of any forum for understanding how to use your masculinity for a positive purpose. And without that, it sort of devolved into that desire to control. And there's a lot more to get into with sort of what that is, but in general, the Me Too movement, the pushback that women in general are sort of socially and collectively giving towards the negative treatment they receive is very much a part of the shift into the age of Aquarius. It is kind of exactly that protective layer, in a sense, around masculinity. It is women telling men they need to get it together on a collective level, examine yourself on a collective level, and change your behavior. Without that, we can't move to a place that is more harmonious and better for everyone. So the sort of extreme pushback you see in religious settings, and I guess it is changing, but a lot of more traditional religious settings, where you see that extreme pushback to the influence of femininity, what you're seeing is the egotistical desire to hold on to whatever power and sort of rigid structures have been imposed on the people in that setting by a confused man. Religion, as we think of it, is very much a product of masculinity in the actual sort of male ego sense. Spirituality is more comes more naturally to women in the physical woman sense, as a result of our own connection to the spiritual principles of masculinity and femininity. And physical men lean more towards the spiritual principle of masculinity. Physical women lean more towards the spiritual principle of femininity. And it is the interplay between these two things by which we evolve spiritually and grow spiritually. That growth and sort of evolution can't happen, particularly in religious settings, if that feminine principle represented by women is controlled or suppressed.
So Nick, it sounds like for me, it sounds like the real struggle is, I understand who I am, you understand who you are, but together we're struggling how to bring that together in balance.
Yeah.
And that's why the lack of understanding, the uptick on suicide, the aggression, and all that good stuff, all that bad stuff.
Well, we don't understand ultimately the true nature of who and what we are, and we see aspects of our own self reflected in other people. So in a sense, the women are the feminine aspect of men and vice versa, just sort of made distinct in the physical experience. And it is through learning to understand each other that we can have a greater understanding of the true nature of self as we learn to reincorporate these distinct aspects of self. But yes. So I also talked a little bit about yesterday, that is binary star systems, because I believe that was yesterday, and how everywhere in nature we see this cyclical sort of reciprocal relationship. And the binary star system, I think the sort of important thing to recognize about that is that it is a mirror for that masculine and feminine, the two halves that cannot be separated in principle. And that relationship always has to be, and it is present on all planes of the spiritual reality. And it is, as I mentioned, when the sort of resolution to any conflict that arises between those two things happens, when that conflict is resolved, that's when spiritual evolution and growth occurs. So the battle of the sexes, quote unquote, is very much an attempt to work out a spiritual problem in our sort of collective sense of self. That happens individually as well as collectively. And it must happen individually first before it can sort of be replicated, or it can be experienced collectively. So even we, sort of just on a straight mundane cultural level, when we have phrases like battle of the sexes, we are aware of the tension that exists, and also we are aware of the struggle and the need to resolve that tension. And part of what must happen in order to resolve that tension, in order for spiritual growth and evolution to occur, is that when the feminine principle points out the ego or the problem in the male has to address it in himself. Or the masculine principle must reflect on itself. And that is a two-way street. If the masculine principle, if the male recognizes a problem in the feminine principle in the woman, then it is the responsibility of the woman or the feminine principle collectively to address that in herself. On average, as I've said, men have more spiritual work to do. But as we were just talking about, yeah, that's not to say that women are better, quote unquote. The problem is when, in particular in religious settings, men say that they are better. And that is much more the case than women attempting to assert their dominance. It all goes back to, in religious settings, Jesus was a man. So sorry, I'm a man, I'm better. There's a direct line to that way of thinking. And of course, as we know, the influence of women was largely ignored and written out of many parts of the Bible, because this whole cycle of history that we are moving out of as we move into the age of Aquarius has been one of sort of masculine or male ego and confusion. There is no male without the female counterpart. In all spiritual traditions, they are inseparable. And it is only our own, whatever, cultural affect, the ego of whatever era of history we're in, that seeks to minimize one or the other. Generally speaking, this does happen in the direction of men minimizing women. As a result of the nature of the work that the masculine principle that sort of men physically and mentally and spiritually have to do. It's more work, and so it's in some sense more difficult. So as we've spoken about, the female counterpart to Jesus was, of course, Mary. Not Mother Mary, but young woman Mary, or probably the same age, I would guess. But she was his favorite disciple. And disciple is probably the wrong word there, but obviously you talk to your wife and tell her everything before you tell your bros. Definitely your students would be, you would tell your wife things before you told your students. And some of that created jealousy amongst the students or the disciples. But the point is, there is no male spiritual growth without female spiritual growth. We are meant to support each other in the ways that we need support.
Yo, what's up, Nick?
Hey.
It's Kevin. I just wanted to kind of just tap in with what you're saying. So I synchronistically, was reading a chapter on gender in the Kabbalah, and a few things kind of resonated with me with what you were saying and the things that I was picking up in my studies lately. This is physiological as far as the masculine and the feminine congruence and how they interplay and work together. Even the sun and the moon create a symbiotic relationship with each other as far as masculine and feminine energy. Sun being masculine and the moon being feminine. The sun gives light and the moon reflects light. This occurs in electrical systems as well. Instead of a positive and a quote unquote negative charge in the electrical world or electrical engineering world, they refer to them as anode and cathode, which etymologically breaks down to mean one that is moving upward and one that is moving downward. So this goes kind of deep into the biology of how our physical body relates to our physical environment, or our etheric body relates to our physical environment, how we receive information and energy. I just wanted to share those things to just kind of further emphasize the importance of that symbiotic relationship between masculine and feminine energy and how it in itself is what creates. There's a group that are known as the 5 percenters, and they are of the understanding that numbers have meaning. The number 1 representing knowledge, which is a masculine number, and the number 2 representing the feminine aspect, which would be wisdom. And with knowledge and wisdom combined, you have understanding. And this is another form of the Trinity in essence, the father, the mother, and the child. That's all I wanted to touch on, and hopefully I didn't say too much.
Thank you, sir. And what Kevin said is very much correct. Everything we see physically is a direct physical extension of spiritual principle. And we do usually associate the sun with masculinity and the moon with femininity, but as an example of how a confused ego would take that out of context, we men and women are more similar than we are different. So any man walking around thinking like, oh, I am the equivalent of the sun and you are the mere equivalent of the moon is confused. The sun is also present within women. These are physicalized principles. We do lean towards certain principles, however. But on the tree of life, Kabbalistic tree of life, as Kevin also was mentioning, the sun is Tiferet. The sun is associated with the divine name Yeshua, which is, of course, translated somehow as Jesus. The divine name Yeshua is a principle. It is a formula, an equation of consciousness that is present within sort of physical men and women, because it is a spiritual principle that we learn how to draw on. And in the name Yeshua, in particular, of particular importance is the Hebrew letter Shin. which is numerically 300 and esoterically meaning fire. It is the fire within combined with the knowledge of spiritual things that leads to salvation, that leads to leading yourself and others out of the environment of confusion, that leads to leading yourself and others out of the closest thing to hell that exists, which is a negative environment that we create here in the physical material experience out of our own ego and confusion, individually and collectively. One of the things I wanted to continue on from last week, was my talking about hell as it appears in the New Testament and what that actually is. And one of the things I wanted to go into was the association we have with fire, and sort of the association between fire and hell. Just as a baseline, the sort of religious Christian interpretation of that is incorrect, and it was used purposefully to attempt to colonize the minds of everyone sort of European Christianity encountered. The idea that you will be sent to some sort of eternal punishment is spiritual insanity, and it is religious insanity. But anyway, the fire I just mentioned, that is represented by the letter Shin in the name Yeshua, which is in the Sephiro beauty Tiferet on the Kabbalistic tree of life, is what is being spoken about in various ways when you see the word fire in the New Testament. And we associate that with hell because in various places it says you will be cast into the fire of Gehenna or wherever. The fire in that letter Shin in the name Yeshua, which is where we get Jesus from, is the same fire that is associated with hell. The fire of salvation is the same that torments you when you are in the experience of hell. I'll say that again. The fire of salvation is the same as the fire that torments you when you are in the experience of hell. And hell is exactly that. It is an experience that we reproduce out of our own ignorance, ego, whatever. It is when we learn how to stop recreating a hellish experience, when we stop being egotistical, ignorant, confused, etc., we direct that fire towards a spiritual and knowledge-based purpose. And we learn how to draw it up within ourselves, spiritually speaking. So we move it from a lower place to a higher place. And we bring ourselves out of whatever hell we have generated for ourselves or that we experience. When it says things like, you will be cast out of Jerusalem into the fire of Gehenna, and sort of in biblical terms, Gehenna was like the region outside the city where they burned trash, etc. When you are cast out of Jerusalem into the fire, you are removed from a place of peace and spiritual balance and awareness into a place of confusion, mental, emotional turmoil, etc. Because Jerusalem is the place of balance and peace within the self. And it is within that place that spiritual growth and evolution takes place, or can occur. I mentioned this back when I was teaching or facilitating in person once, but Jerusalem is a kind of a compound word there. Salam means peace. When you hear the Muslims say salam alaikum, peace, salam. And the first part of Jerusalem is Heru. Heru is the Christ figure of Egyptian, essentially religion, but more deeper than that, as the spiritually resonant symbol for the Christ principle. Heru is the son, the S-O-N, the child. So Jerusalem quite means the peace that employing the Christ principle within brings. And when you do that, you remove yourself from any hell that you have created for yourself. And this happens individually and collectively. We are all seeking to employ these principles within so that we stop recreating hell without. Comments or questions?
Please say that again. Please say that again. Heru is the Christ principle,
Yes.
and
Heru,
salam is peace.
salam is peace. Heru salam. The peace that Christ, that employing the Christ principle brings within the self, as Jerusalem is itself a symbol, a metaphor, a physicalized spiritual principle of the self. Employing that Christ principle brings you out of the hell that you create for yourself or for other people, individually and collectively, as we all do this, as we all try to figure out how to employ that Christ, the principle of salvation, the equation of consciousness that Yeshua, the Hebrew word, the name, is. That is the thing that saves us from the hell that we create out of our own ignorance, selfishness, etc., whatever. So all this, whenever you see in the New Testament, well, let me stop there. I'm sorry. Was there another question?
I just want to ask something, Nick. I don't know if you're familiar with Rabbi David Benner, B-E-N-N-E-R, but he describes everything that you just said. But to add something, he says everybody stop with the second part of Jerusalem to mean peace. He said it means peace beyond completion. So, in other words, there is nothing that is lacking in you. When you reach this point in your mindset, at this point of who you are, when you recognize that, you recognize there is nothing lacking in you, and it moves you to a place where when you learn to create space for whatever is needed, everything comes to you. You can clearly see, or it opens up a place in you for new awareness. So I think that just adds everything, adds more to what you already said. You know, if you can tie it in and make more sense, so I'd appreciate it. If you see what I'm talking about.
Thank you. Can you state that once again? Or what the specific thing you wanted me to respond to, if there was one?
Well, the second part of it, you mentioned Jeru was the Christ principle. That part is what he said, but he also said the second part of the name Salem or Shalom is not just peace; it is peace beyond completion. It takes you to a place of completion. So the peace comes because you understand who you are, that you are complete and there's nothing that you're lacking. So anything that pops up, even if it's something that you've taken yourself to, your solution is within you. Everything that you need is within you. And when you move to that place of understanding and that place of balance, that is what brings about the peace.
Gotcha. Thank you. I think you answered it. Everything you need is within you. It is peace without completion because you don't need anything else to be completed. What you need is present within you. You just have to find it, investigate the nature of self, and you will find what it is that you need. So everywhere you hear in the New Testament or wherever about sin leading to being cast into the fire of Gehenna, of Hades, or whichever other word is being mistranslated as hell. Well, maybe not mistranslated, but misrepresented. Everywhere you see some action that will get you cast into fire, that is things that throw off the balance within, things that produce mental and emotional turmoil that kick you out of the place of peace within yourself, mentally, emotionally, physically, etc. And it is eternal in the sense that as long as you keep doing those things, you will experience that fire, or the sort of fire that will burn, as opposed to fire that is enlightenment and that does not produce negative experiences at all. So please understand the gap.
Is that the same fire that which one that said that the fire is shot up in my bones? Jeremiah.
Yes, sir. That it is the burning bush. It is the and please understand, this is the gap between what is presented in religious, quote, sort of, quote, traditional religious settings in Christianity, and the actual spiritual nature of what is being written about. It's completely different. And how do I know this? The same way that you are able to know it, when you investigate and engage the spiritual task of knowing thyself.
Nick, I'm having, I don't know. Can you say that about the hell part one more time, please?
Sure. So when they associate fire with the experience of hell in the New Testament, when it is said you will be cast into fire, whatever, that is any action, etc., that by which you sort of knowingly move away, or even unknowingly, but whatever makes you move away from the place of balance and inner peace into emotional, physical, mental turmoil, etc. The fire is the same fire. The experience is different because of whether or not we understand how to use it, whether or not we are moving in alignment with it. And the fire of Gehenna, or the place outside of Jerusalem, is exactly that. It is the turmoil that we throw ourselves into individually and collectively when we do not know how to operate with the Christ principle, which is the aspect of spirit or self that is responsible for our own salvation, individually and collectively. And what salvation is rising up out of the negative things we create, basically. Physically, spiritually, mostly, well, ultimately spiritually. But anything that could be called hellish in terms of negative experience, it is something that we have created, either directly or indirectly, either us individually or some other person. The point is, we are responsible collectively and individually for creating those kinds of experiences. What is being spoken about is how to save ourselves from recreating those experiences, from reproducing self-destruction individually and collectively, etc. I hope that helps. Oh, Barbara.
Very much so, because the thing that just streaks through it is what you just said. We are our own saviors. We determine if we're going to stay in the hellish turmoil and chaos that we create or that others create around us, or we determine whether we're going to rise above it, meaning, i.e. salvation, rise above it and deliver ourselves. So thank you very much.
Yes, ma'am. And let me add, one of the main reasons we are present here in this physical material experience is to experience hell. One of the main reasons we are here is to know what it means to suffer. Now, I'm not saying we came here to suffer or to experience hell in the sense that that's what we're supposed to experience and keep experiencing while here. No, this is a place where the possibility to experience that is present. Naturally, because it's a possibility, probably going to happen. It did, now we experience it. And as a result of experiencing it, we are given the path out of this experience. If we were not allowed to face problems of our own creation, of our collective creation, there would be no reason for us to be here. One of the main purposes of this physical material experience is that so in the event where we create something hellish, we figure out why we created it and how to stop recreating it. And in so doing, complete the spiritual work that we are destined to complete, that we came here to complete in the first place. This physical material experience is the best place to do spiritual work because it is the place where you are allowed to experience to the full extent the problems that we create out of ignorance, selfishness, whatever. All of those things, and the reason we creating those things are things within ourselves that must be addressed in order to fulfill the purpose we all chose for coming here in the first place. And yes, we did choose to come to this physical material plane. One of the things I mentioned back when I started to talk about the nature of hell as it is presented or misrepresented by sort of religious Christianity is that nobody gets sent anywhere. No one is, when you're cast out of Jerusalem, you're throwing yourself out, essentially. You're diving down the staircase and experiencing all the pain that comes with falling down a staircase. But we do that out of ignorance, confusion, etc. But nobody gets sent anywhere in the sense that there is a judge in the religious sense of God existing to judge people.
Nick,
So, yes, ma'am.
I just have a funny comment, sort of. When you talked about diving down the staircase, and if we decide to do that, you know, whatever comes is what we get because we dove down a staircase. Or you could do like my kids used to do. You could get a piece of cardboard and sit on the cardboard and skid down the staircase, and you end up at the bottom laughing, having fun, and deciding I might want to do that again.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to unpack from that. metaphor.
Nick, this is Ramel. May I ask a question here?
Yes, ma'am.
What you just described, can we call that the wilderness?
Oh, I see. Maybe relatively to where we came from before choosing to engage this sort of process of learning. But there are wildernesses within wildernesses. And the wilderness, I think, generally is just the process of learning how to survive in the spiritual jungle, as it were, where the only things trying to eat you are you in this jungle.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am. And as I was saying, nobody gets sent anywhere in the sense that God is the judge, as is presented in religious settings. We chose to come here to this physical material experience, and we will choose to leave. And these choices are being made at deep places within us. And for example, the choice to come here was kind of like we instinctively know that there is something we need to work on or some challenge we need to face in order to grow. And so we engage the challenges that are present in this experience in order to work out that or attempt to pass that spiritual trial, because we know it's something we need. Now, nothing is exactly guaranteed. This place is a difficult experience. But that is the reason we have it. And that's the same, as I mentioned, I think last week, with heaven. It is not a place that you get sent to. It is the fundamental nature of reality that you become aware of when you divest yourself from the hellish experience that illusion, confusion, ego, etc. creates. The kingdom of heaven is within you. So also must hell be. If heaven is within you, hell is within you. Learn how to remove the hell from yourself so that you can experience the heaven that is more natural to your spiritual state of being. The basic principle for all investigation of the self is meditation. It is through employing that principle and reflecting on the nature of your own experiences that you can gain understanding of how these experiences fit into the greater context of your own spiritual purpose. And meditation is as simple as introspection. Just think about how you feel, what you believe, why you believe it, etc. Self-observation, being aware of your own self, why you are the way you are, and not just what, but also why you believe and think and feel. That is the basic mechanism of meditation. And it is through meditation, which is referred to in most of the Bible as prayer. It is through meditation that you can learn to identify the things within the self that keep that cycle of creating hellish experience going. And if you can identify those things, you can stop doing those things, or you can stop thinking those things, or you can learn to let go of feeling those things, whatever aspect of self it is that needs to be addressed. And in so doing, reproduce, rebuild the new Jerusalem. Recreate the new heaven and earth within. And in so doing, save yourself. And then teach others how to do the same. That's it. That's the whole Bible.
Hey, Nick,
Yes, sir.
can I share an article that I read on meditation?
Sure.
Part of it anyway. This guy was talking about being able to meditate for an hour. He was saying, and I don't quite agree with the time limit thing. I think it's based on who and what you are, what you're going through, and there's circumstances to me that dictate the time, what is needed. But that part I didn't agree with. But some of the other things he said made sense to me. He said that when you're in a state of meditation and your finger itches or your leg twitches at something, he says the body is used to being in control. We pay attention to our bodies more than we pay attention to any other aspect of us. And it is the body responding to saying, this isn't normal for me. This is something else that you're doing away from what you usually do with me. And he's saying that when you don't react to those things in a negative way, like becoming angry or ignoring them, you embrace them by noticing it's there and just almost talking to yourself, okay, I'm aware of you, I see you. And you eventually move to a place where the body stops interrupting and the body becomes one with the meditation. The other thing he said is if you ever notice that you reach that meditative state and you are thinking about something that happened in your past or something that you need to do in your future that you want to connect to or something that you want to accomplish. He said, again, it's more of the ego talking to you. When you become centered or balanced is when you can bring everything to the here and now. And it is a focus on who I am, what I see that I truly am, being honest with it and what I am to become. So you look at the here and now rather than focus on any other aspect of self. So those two things kind of caught my attention, and I thought they were worth sharing while you were talking about meditation.
Thank you. That reminded me, one of the things I wanted to point out about the related to what you had the ability to gain in meditation and through spiritual practice like that. In the age of Aquarius, those things that we've forgotten, those miraculous things that would seem miraculous, but in fact are more fundamental to how reality itself works when we are spiritually engaged with it. Those things that we would call miracles will become more commonplace in the age of Aquarius as a result of the nature of this energetic environment changing. It will be easier to access those kinds of things. And we're, again, I think just in the beginning of this shift, this transition. But I think nevertheless, we can access those aspects of self more easily if we are willing to put in the work anyway. And it is through meditation that those aspects of self can be opened up. The fire that is in the name Yeshua is a core component of our spiritual self. It is an energy that we have the ability to employ, and physically speaking, draw upwards from a lower nature, so to speak, to a higher nature, from our lower self to our higher self. And that's why there's a lot of detail and sort of metaphysical truth you could get into in terms of how the physical body is itself a reproduction of spiritual principle. Like there are 33 bones in your spine. Jesus was 33 years old. There's 33 levels of Masonic, whatever. There's many ways in which various groups of people in various religious or spiritual, etc. settings have been aware of these kinds of physical symbols of spiritual principles. They're definitely in the Bible, of course, but they are all representative of the actual mechanics of salvation, essentially, of employing the messianic awareness, the Christ principle, and learning how to evolve and grow spiritually via meditation. And what we're doing right now on the phone is a form of collective meditation. It is a contemplation on things that we have experienced, ideas that we've had that help put the puzzle pieces together as to how this great work is accomplished. So, in the age of Aquarius, more miracles happen because it is a more spiritually based collective awareness that we are beginning to engage. And when you meditate, contemplate the nature of the self, when you learn how to channel your own, let's say, desire, emotion, thought patterns, etc., towards a particular goal, and that goal, generally speaking, is the creation of harmony, peace, and awareness within, or a greater capacity to become aware of what is present within you and around you, then those things that we consider miraculous will become more commonplace. So I think we're at a pretty good place to stop, but any comments or questions?
Only excellent job. Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Ron, this is Jackie. I just wanted to know, do you care to share that article on meditation?
I was at Barnes and Noble looking through it. It was, if I can find the magazine, I will. If I can find it, yeah. I was back.
Okay.
I was the early part of the week, yeah. And if I can find it, I certainly will let you know.
Thank you, Ron.
Okay. But I was just going to say, Nick, excellent job. There's a lot of information you shared with us.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. Hey, everyone in here is a teacher to everyone else in here. And that is the way it has always worked.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Appreciate you, Nick.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Ron.
Thanks, Nick.
Okay.
Bye,
Thank
Fran.
you. Bye-bye, y'all.
Bye.
Probably have to go over this again, but anyway.
Sure. No
Yeah.
problem.
Thank you.